And the unique thing about becoming a delegate is that they told me that, Tommy, while yes, you do bring the conscience of your area to the conference, but when making decisions, you are making decisions for AA as a whole. And while a pamphlet or an item, a particular piece might not serve people in Alabama, the person in Alaska or somewhere in Canada that's fairly remote, it may serve them. So it's not just me voting the conscience of my area. It is actually taking into consideration all of Alcoholics Anonymous and the needs across all of North America and Canada. And that each of those 93 area delegates that come there are tasked with the exact same thing. That a group of erstwhile alcoholics can find a way, and anarchists at heart for the most part, find a way to stick together, stay together, and move forward is still amazing to me. Absolutely amazing.
I heard it through the grapevine.
Welcome. It's the AA Grapevine half-hour variety hour featuring the collected voices of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm Sam, an alcoholic in Palm Springs, California.
I'm Don, an alcoholic in Greensboro, North Carolina.
Okay, let's get into it. Don, today we have a sober alcoholic on the show who has a massive service position. A delegate.
Delegates carry the group conscience of all their home groups in the U.S. and Canada to New York every April. They meet along with a bunch of other representatives like the trustees and folks from AA World Services and the Grapevine, and they all determine what AA needs to do to carry our message of recovery forward.
We're going to learn what happened last April during AA's annual business meeting. To set the stage for today's interview, we need to describe how we are organized.
Bill and Dr. Bob, our founders, created AA, and they were looked to for all manner of advice and leadership. But they realized at some point that they were mortal. What would become of AA when they're gone?
Bill came up with our general service structure, that the founders would be replaced with a principle, and that principle is group conscience.
The group conscience of the fellowship is carried from our home groups by their GSRs to the districts.
The districts are organized into areas.
There are 93 areas in the U.S. and Canada.
The areas each elect a delegate to carry the group conscience to the annual conference. It meets every April in New York.
That's all commonly called our upside-down triangle. The home groups are at the top, the broad part of the triangle, and the delegate is at the bottom in the little pointy end.
So who runs AA? The home groups.
This will never work. Wait.
Right. It's worked since 1951.
So who is this guest we're all worked up about?
Don, today we welcome Tomy G. from Montgomery, Alabama. Tomy is a current delegate and the past chair of the Literature Committee. But first, the news.
The Grapevine magazine is holding its annual photo contest. Each year, we hold a competition for members' photos to be featured in our wall calendar. Send your most striking, high-res, 300 DPI photos that reflect the joy of living, serenity, and other sobriety themes. Contributors of selected photos will receive complimentary copies of the calendar and pocket planner. The deadline for submission is December 1st, 2024.
And if you're wondering what a high-res 300 DPI photo is, just send the biggest file you can send.
We want some pretty pictures.
Hi folks, we need your stories on the individual traditions. Pick one and write about your or your group's experience with it. How has a tradition played a part in your life? How has your understanding of a tradition changed? What is a personal experience where a tradition played a part? Visit aagrapevine.org for guidelines and to submit.
Hi guys, I'm Tomy G. from Montgomery, Alabama, currently serving as the delegate for Alabama, Northwest Florida, area number 1.
Area number 1. That's because Alabama starts with an A.
I like to think it's because Bill knew we were going to be the best.
Okay.
So is North Carolina Area 51 because they knew we were the weirdest? And I say that because I used to live there.
We're the one with the aliens.
Actually, Area 51 is the most out of this world.
Yeah, there you go. Tomy, when did you get sober?
My sobriety date is February 18th, 2005.
And what was going on with you that brought you to AA of all places?
I'm going to go with nothing good for $1,000.
So phrase your answer in the form of a question.
That's right. Life wasn't going well. My relationship was rocky with my wife. We had been trying to get sober for about 2 years, although not seeking any outside help or really telling anyone, just sitting on our hands and hoping we didn't drink again. And we ended up in an argument that was not solvable. And I left the house that night, and I was pacing in my vehicle back and forth across the bridge of the lake we live on. And I opened up my flip phone because that's how long it's been since I got sober. And there weren't numbers in there to call. It was family members and friends who said, call before you come over. If you come over, you can't do this, this, and this. Family members that said, I can't watch you kill yourself, Bubba. Things of that nature. But there was one number in that phone, and that guy I had known since I was 4 years old in YMCA kindergarten. And we'd remained friends the entire time. And he had called me 6 months prior or so, and several times after, and told me that he had gotten sober. And I don't know if y'all had this person in your life, but he was the guy in my life that I would compare myself to. If I ever get as bad as him, then I'll need some help. And then he got sober, and I had a series of other unfortunate events. A friend of mine was murdered, and that really put the pressure on life. And so he gave me some instructions. He said, go to Alexander City, which is a city just north of the lake I live on, and find a guy named John. Tell him your name, tell him you can't stop drinking, and ask if he'll help. And that was all the instructions that he gave me. And I was like, that's it. He goes, that'll work. That's almost exactly what I did. And I don't know if God knew I needed to be able or willing to trust the person that I finally reached out for help from, but I believed him. And so I walked into a group of strangers, and I did exactly as he said, and it worked. They wrapped me up. They did what AA does. And the rest is history from that day forward.
I love that was a simple task, not necessarily easy, but a simple task to give an alcoholic who's reaching out for help, talk to this person, call this person, and then the assurance of that will work.
John happened to not be at that meeting. He was actually in the hospital. And so I walked in looking for a John who wasn't there. So if I had an opportunity, John's not here, I could just walk out. But I didn't. An older guy by the name of Dwight, and Dwight was 30 plus years sober. I was 33 at the time. My thought was, what can you tell me about drinking? You haven't had a drink since I was 3. And somehow, oddly enough, I ended up with a copy of the Big Book in the back of my car that night. And I'm not really exactly sure how, but I suspect that crafty old Dwight had a hand in that. And, they did what we do. People who suffer from alcoholism walk into a home group having no idea what to do or if this is survivable or anything. All the different ways that we show up to Alcoholics Anonymous vary so widely. And then all of a sudden it doesn't matter because you made it here. And we know what to do with people that suffer with alcoholism.
So you've been sober a while now. What's the coolest thing that's happened to you in your life from getting sober?
You know what? All I ever wanted to do in hindsight, when I did some of this work, I realized that all I ever wanted in life was to be part of and to be in community with other people. And I wasn't ever. And today, there's a list of people in my phone that is a lot longer than I can even fathom that I could call at any time, day or night, and they would say, absolutely. And they don't even know the question, perhaps. They would be there for me. So I think the coolest thing is not a single event, but rather the fact of the community that we create, the love we share for each other. There's nothing greater in this world to me than being able to be my friend's cheerleader. Not necessarily always to their face, but at least they always know that I got their back and I know they have my back. And I don't know about y'all, but I didn't have any of that prior to Alcoholics Anonymous.
I get what you're saying about the community part to be a part of, because, I had that some before I got sober, but most of the time it was me putting on a show to fit in whatever situation I was in. And now people know me.
Which mask do I have to wear for which group of friends?
There you go.
And please don't let these two friend groups meet each other.
Oh,
yeah. That's going to get really confusing. So to genuinely be yourself and to say, this is what I'm presenting to the world and I'm okay with that. That's a gift I never would have imagined happening.
In your sobriety, you have ended up being a delegate. What are the qualifications for being a delegate? You sound like a regular old drunk to me.
First and foremost, I am just a regular old drunk. I began my service to Alcoholics Anonymous fairly early on. There was a need to start a new group when I was about 9 months sober. And for some unknown reason, they decided that I should be the treasurer of said group. And it started there. I learned my greatest service faux pas was committed from the first district position I ever received.
What happened?
Oh, you want to show you? I was asked to do the when and where, which is the old form of the meeting list and the meeting guide type stuff, right?
Uh-huh.
And they handed it to me, and immediately I noticed the formatting issues. Now, and it was a trifold, and it wasn't laying out well. So I immediately...
It was a card that you fold 3 times that had lists. In the old days, we had printed lists of meetings.
That is correct. Well, it didn't fit. It folded weird. So I immediately took it upon myself without any request from anyone else to reformat the entire document. And I was so proud of myself and so excited to take it back to that next district meeting and present this work that I knew that they would love. And the look on those old timers' faces when I handed them a modified document that the district did not request us to modify, or the groups didn't request us to modify, was one. They were as kind as they could be, but some of those old timers, could just tell you exactly how it was. And so I was now given the task to put it back exactly how it was. Do not make my changes. Thank you for my input. And please come back again next month. So as a result, part of the lesson in all of that is that I am not to get in here and fix these things. There's nothing broken per se. I am to be a communicator, a facilitator of information, a passer up and down the chain of Alcoholics Anonymous. I am not to recreate the wheel. The wheel already exists. Not so much stay status quo, and not ever change anything, but make sure if I have a really great idea that I run it by and get the approval of the groups that are responsible, in this case, in a district case, that I am serving.
When we were bantering at the beginning of the show, I said that you have a massive service position. And I want to be clear to folks that that's not saying that this service position is so much better or bigger or more, but the massive amount, the massive descriptor is the work that you do. There is so much work put upon a delegate. How do you find the time to do this?
That is an excellent question, and one I had to consider when I discussed with my sponsor about the opportunity, as I had served multiple other area positions and then become the alternate delegate, and it was coming up to election time, and there was no real way to estimate that time very accurately. And he gave me some sage advice, as they so commonly do. He said to me basically that you'll find the time. It will probably be something like a large amount of hours demanded here, followed by less here, and it ebbed and flowed. He later checked back with me to ask how that estimate was going. And I did estimate that prior to conference this year, I was utilizing about 20 hours a week to be the delegate.
Wow.
It is an extremely demanding position at every point down. One thing I learned from conference and being able to attend board weekend this year is the amount of work that we ask our trustees to do. It simply blew me away. Being able to work with Irma, who was the trustees literature committee chair, her calendar is packed. And something for us to take into consideration as we ask volunteers to do more and more and more. I think between conferences, I counted 37 hours of additional meetings outside of conference that were just for us to attend as delegates of the conference. And so that isn't expected. That's all new as of the 73rd conference, that we would meet at different times during the year as the conference body and have chances to discuss things outside of conference. Not, of course, any of the agenda items or things like that, but the other types of business that needed to be discussed.
It sounds like a good idea.
And technology has made that available and made that possible. My grand sponsor was also a delegate. My sponsor was a past delegate as well. And I asked them, because my sponsor served in the 63rd panel, 2013, 2014. And his sponsor was before that. And so his only way of receiving information from conference was basically snail mail and some emails. But even the GSO and the other people involved weren't utilizing those other technologies yet. So it wasn't there. And now you realize that you're having not constant communication, but the opportunity for constant communication. It's a changing world, and Alcoholics Anonymous is embracing that. This podcast is an excellent example of the way that we are embracing the current world and trying to meet alcoholics where they are.
Tomy, I'm LCM, which is of my district, which is kind of the district's assistant to the DCM, or the chairperson of the district. And I don't have a vote. I only have a voice. And I've struggled with that, but I can see how it's useful to be only able to offer suggestions because, well, frankly, I had to face my own ego. So I've always thought it's amazing the way delegates can sit in front of a large assembly and have people very heated on two sides of an argument and just really putting across their point of view because they've got to protect AA. How do you remain neutral in that boiling water?
Another incredible question, Don. The reality is that I am there to serve them. And anything that is being said is not necessarily being said to me, but for them. I mean, I know that's very cliche-ish, but it needs to be said. It's on their heart. They want their voice heard. So to remain calm and to give each person the amount of respect that I was given as someone who would go to the microphone with anything that I needed to say. So I suppose that I somehow lived by the example that was given to me before, and watching people at regional forums, taking some of the questions that can come very hot and heavy at our area assembly where we decide to change the brand of coffee we're going to serve. And that causes the greatest. Ooh, how about this? I got sober right when they decided to quit smoking.
Oh, yeah.
That one about got us. And I watched those guys handle it with grace, dignity, compassion, love, and understanding. And this opportunity, as with every service position opportunity, is once in a lifetime. You alluded to it, Sam, that delegate is a different word, the title, but the reality is it's a once in a lifetime 2-year opportunity for me to give it all I got. And that realization came very strong for me. However, as I sat and thought about it, so was alternate GSR, DCM, GSR. All of those were all once in a lifetime opportunities. I just didn't feel the gravity so much until I became a delegate. And then I understood how much it has meant to Alcoholics Anonymous and how the delegate system has served Alcoholics Anonymous faithfully and not perfectly, but it has served Alcoholics Anonymous. It worked. They surmised that it would work. They put it into place. It worked, and it still works now.
It absolutely does. And each one of those service positions has prepared, maybe not fully, but has prepared for the next service position one holds. General service work is it's amazing the work that it does on me.
Mm.
Tomy, this conference in April, what are a few things that you'd like the listeners to know that came from that conference?
Yeah, what happened?
The 74th General Service Conference, just like the 73rd General Service Conference, there were large topics, as there are with every conference. The experience in New York and at conferences, unlike anything I had ever experienced. My hat's off to the GSO staff that supports everyone while they're there.
That's the General Service Office.
The General Service Office employees that support the delegates while they're at conference. The tireless and endless work that goes into planning such an event. And this year, I would say there were a few topics, and the one that had probably one of the most significant amount of conversation was on the literature committee, and that was the plain language big book. The one thing about this conference is I saw the level of dedication and love by a very large group of people for Alcoholics Anonymous. The willingness to show up, be ready, be prepared, do the work across a very large group. Truly amazing experience to be part of that and to get to go through each of those agenda items and give them the time, the care, and the concern that they needed. I will never forget my opportunity.
So was the plain language translation approved?
Yes, it was approved after a lengthy debate on the conference floor. I think we clocked it somewhere around 6 hours for that particular agenda item. The Conference Literature Committee report took in total about 7.5 hours. And the biggest portion of that was the plain language big book translation. And at the end of all of the discussion, by a 2/3 majority, it passed.
Can you tell us what is the plain language translation of the big book?
The plain language translation of the big book, which a lot of people don't like to hear the word big book involved in this particular project or the words Alcoholics Anonymous. And I get that. Guys, I've heard both sides of this particular agenda item for 10 solid months as the chair and as a member of the committee, as each of the committee members did. It was an effort to make the language in the big book understandable, make the writings in the big book understandable by someone who had no more than a 5th grade reading level.
I'm looking forward to it. What else happened at the conference that also you can say, we did this to help the still suffering alcoholic, and you can tell that it is for that purpose?
I think one of the more memorable, because there's a lot when you're looking at 83 agenda items, and 56 or so % of those became recommendations from the committees. So the number of recommendations was large. To try and single too many of them out, I can tell you there was a moment where we were considering a new pamphlet. And initially the committee did not recommend for us to go forward with that. A floor action was made and it came up and we began the discussion, and the room, you could hear, was not necessarily in favor either. And then a couple of shares later from a couple of other delegates, and this wave of energy, emotion, feeling came across, and you felt it shift. And I wish I could tell you the exact words that were said, but the feeling in the room was palatable, and the room changed their mind. And I think that's the beauty of seeking the God's conscience in the way that we do things, having substantial unanimity for approval of any items. So that one was very memorable for sure. There was so much good work done at the 74th General Service Conference. Some amazing people doing a lot of work to make sure that Alcoholics Anonymous is still here for the next sick and suffering alcoholic. Couldn't be prouder of being part of it.
What about the 5th edition of the Big Book?
5th edition of the Big Book is still underway. Because we now live in a digital world, when they opened submissions to update the stories on the back, They received 2,500 stories. And
Wow.
they thought they would leave the submission open for like 6 months. And I can't recall, but they closed the submission window early. So they had to make a working group of about 10 different people to begin reading each and every one of the 2,500 stories that were submitted.
Wow.
That's a slush pile.
That is no small task.
No small task. And the news from the 74th General Service Conferences, we're down to about 150 finalists. I think you would call it finalists that had been through the entire process. So that is the point that they are right now. It's in its final stages, but they'll come back. And I would most likely think that the 76th General Service Conference will have the opportunity to finalize that.
I've got a betting pool I want to put out there. What's the page number of and acceptance is going to be on? The acceptance story that's always quoted in the back of the third edition and the fourth edition. I'm going to predict it's on page 512.
The only prediction that I would feel safe making is that it will still be in there.
What about the Grapevine? This podcast is provided for free.
Or is it provided at no cost?
It's provided at no cost, Sam. Well said. And we live by Grapevine subscriptions and Grapevine literature sales. That's what supports this podcast. And the Grapevine is doing other things as well, like Lavinia and YouTube and Instagram. What's the status with funding for the Grapevine?
To my knowledge, the funding for the Grapevine is in their third year of their 5-year plan. And so the funding has been in place. The results from the first several years, this podcast, the Instagram, the YouTube channel, there's well over 200 videos on YouTube already on things that I don't know. There's a Twitter account. Moving into the modern era, and all to me goes back to meeting the drunks where they are.
Right.
And this is a place that they are. They're on podcasts, they're on social media, they're on these platforms. I think that if Bill Wilson had been alive, we would have had the very first Twitter account ever, possibly, or something like it. Because I think that he's like, that's where the people are. That's where we need to be, because that's where the drunks are going to be. Because anywhere there's people, there's drunks. And so let's go find them. Let's go where they are. Let's make sure that they can find us and know how to get in touch with us when they need us. Because if that hand gets stuck out, we don't want to miss it. If someone reaches out, let's make sure that we're there.
And going back to your story about having one phone number in your phone, it may be that someone has only one way that they find Alcoholics Anonymous. It shows up in one thing that they're using. So let's see if we can make sure we do.
Absolutely. I think it's imperative. The Public Information Committee this year had a very long list of agenda items that each of them was very detailed and involved. And those guys did a tremendous amount of work, as did all the committees, the Grapevine Committee, each of those committees, Finance Committee this year. It's just incredible the amount of work that each committee has to put in to be able to be informed for the conference and to be able to put forth recommendations or not take action on things or whatever the case may be, all in an effort to find people, to be there. We all know about the person who's outside the door and looking for Alcoholics Anonymous, and we talk about that person a lot. I think that the podcast and other types of things might appeal to the person who's 10 years sober, 15 years sober, because it is very possible to be miserable inside the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the only sufferer is not the brand new person at times. So you guys and the other ways that we are attempting to reach out to people, we don't know who's going to hear it or who's going to need it, but it might be that guy or that girl with long-term sobriety who just doesn't feel it anymore. I had that experience in Alcoholics Anonymous at about 7 years sober. And had I not had a network in place, I don't know what would have happened. And something caught my ear or caught my eye, and I asked another question and to the next right person or whatever the case was, and I was back on track. I was back on the beam, as we say.
You were talking about the 5-year plan for the Grapevine. That is for developing the app. If anybody has downloaded the app and tried it and had trouble because it signed you out, I just downloaded the newest version. It's getting better. They keep working on the app.
There's always another version when it comes to the world of apps and software.
Yeah.
So if you tried the Grapevine app and it wasn't working for you, we invite you to try it again. See what's new.
Tomy, can you share the most moving moment of the conference, the whole week you were there, that was personally uplifting?
It's interesting, the conference being a week long, there are several of those that took place for me in both the 73rd and the 74th, trying to isolate one down. I think that what I would go with, prior to the conference, you meet as a committee to do your housekeeping meeting, setting up how you're going to conduct your committee work meetings. So what type of work you're going to do during your committee.
That sounds tedious.
No, just necessary. The format of, are we going to require substantial unanimity? Are we going to go around the room left and then back right? How will we make sure that the meeting is conducted and everyone's voice is heard? And just getting things in line to be ready to do work. We didn't discuss work at that point, is what I'm trying to say. No agenda items are discussed. At that meeting, during the conversation of the agenda items of how we would handle them, because we don't have to take them in order. When you get those, they are numbered A, B, C, D, E. We, as a committee, can determine what sequence we want to take those in. And so as we were talking, we had the entire day of Saturday set aside for the plain language big. They immediately gave us 9 to 5. We immediately knew that we wanted to start at 8. And they were agreeable to that. When we got there and began to do work, we immediately knew we were going past 5.
Yeah.
I believe the total time that day was somewhere shy of 10 and a half hours that we're in that room, with about a 30-minute break for lunch. But during that housekeeping meeting, I asked the committee, can we make the vote on the plain language big book be required to be unanimous by the committee? And that didn't get approved. They didn't want one person out of 9 to hold up a recommendation.
That's substantial unanimity.
That's more than super. So I accept that's fine. I thought it was a bit overreaching anyway, and possibly grandiose on my part, but that didn't matter. I wanted to ask, and they answered. So as we started our day Saturday and the work began, and we had a system for going through all 180 pages that we had to review that day. And once that was all done, and we were to the time of crafting the recommendation, writing the recommendation, and it had been written, and we all had more or less agreed to the verbiage of it. It was time to vote. And you could have heard a pin drop. The feeling was strong, and it was just in the air. And I called for the vote, and all 9 hands went up. So it was unanimous. As a committee, we unanimously decided to make the recommendation that we made. Now, we are just one link in the chain of the process to act on that particular agenda item. But to me, what I'd asked for and what I thought we really wanted to see came true that day. And the literature committee was diverse, male, female, Canadian, American, East Coast, West Coast, Central, well represented age group wise. We had a bilingual delegate on there as well. He looked up from that book while we were reading at one point and said, guys, I understand this book. And he's not a native English reader or speaker. And so it was so, you asked for just one, but I think that there are so many. And the current delegate from Tennessee estimated that at conference, all time involved in work from the beginning to midnight on Friday night when we finally closed business was 100 hours. The conference week demands everything you have. The preparation that they provide, the suggested preparations that they provide are invaluable. That piece was invaluable. And obviously they know what you need because they've been there and done that.
Yeah.
They talked about hitting the wall at times, and my experience coming off the dais after I'd finished the report was I didn't have anything else left in me. But what an experience, and I wouldn't have wanted to miss it. And I am so grateful that the example of service that I had been allowed the people in my area to vote yes on my name and elect me as their delegate, and to come and serve Alcoholics Anonymous in this capacity is quite incredible. And service does change you. There's no doubt, Sam, you said it very well. It demands the things that Don was asking about. How do you sit up there and take the fire, take the love, take the agreement and disagreement? How do you balance all of that stuff? But I will tell you, by the time that I was delegate, I was ready to do that. And the previous service positions had done that. As treasurer of the area, that was something that I had to do as well.
Tomy, I tell you one thing. I think your area did well in choosing you, and thank you for helping Alcoholics Anonymous do the work that's needed to keep it here and keep it growing and being where other alcoholics are. Thank you for all that. Tomy, with everything that you've told us about this conference, I think we could probably go and create, 10 or 12 more hours of podcast content to describe. Where, though, would someone go? How can someone get information about what was done at this conference?
Your first source is your sitting delegate. That individual will have a report back that they do in your area, most likely. Some are done by Zoom. Most travel to districts or groups that request them to come. If that's not something that's readily available to you, or not really even sure who your delegate is, there will be also a final report printed and distributed. Typically in Area 1, they distribute them to me, and I take them to our area assembly, give them to the DCMs. DCMs give them to GSRs. So, and also online at AA.org, another valuable resource that we didn't talk too much about. They are constantly making improvements to that website. It'll be available on there as well. But that final report will have everything in it, and you will be blown away with the amount of time and effort and energy that was put into the conference, as it is every single year.
It's an enormous commitment. Thank you, Tomy, for taking on that commitment and serving as delegate. And thanks for being on the show today and sharing with us what happened.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tomy.
Thank y'all for having me.
The Grapevine and Lavinia apps are now available for both iOS and Android phones.
To get yours, go to the App Store on your phone and search for AA Grapevine or Lavinia.
I'm at the very wit's end. Cuckoo.
This Wit's End submitted by Peter P. of San Diego.
Question. If you declare spiritual bankruptcy, do you still have to make your amends? It's really not that funny. Thanks for joining us. The AA Grapevine Half-Hour Variety Hour is posted every Monday and is produced by AA Grapevine, Inc. We don't speak for AA as a whole. We share the experience, strength, and hope of members to help others recover from alcoholism. Podcast info, including how to call in, is at aagrapevine.org/podcast. Search AA Grapevine in the App Store on your phone or find AA Grapevine on Instagram and YouTube. All things Grapevine are available at aagrapevine.org. If you want to know more about AA, search online for Alcoholics Anonymous in your city or visit aa.org.
That was freaking amazing.